half of the presentation will be recorded. Thank you, Ansley. And one other piece of housekeeping before we jump in, if you could, during the presentation portion, use the chat for any questions or comments that you have. Feel free to drop any thoughts in there. If you don't know how to get the chat up, if you hover over your screen and click on the More button, there will be an option for chat, so you can pop that up, put any thoughts in there and see what other people have to say as well. And then once we finish the presentation, we'll get to our discussion portion, and feel free to unmute yourself and jump in with questions then. All right, so we'll go ahead and introduce our team here. So I'll start with myself, and then I'll kind of give an overview of who we have from our project team and from our project partners as well. My name is Kat Onor. I am a planner with Pond and Company, a consulting firm that was hired to help Cherokee County on this ambitious effort. With me from Pond, we have Wade Carroll, who is a planner as well and our director of transportation planning. We also have Blue Cypress on the call, Ansley Belton, as well as Jill Carnow on the call. Then we have a couple of our project partners as well. So Cherokee County is leading this effort. We have Margaret Stallings and Catherine Long, planners, and Margaret is the planning and zoning director. So they're on our call as well. Then we have Erica Nelder is the communications director with Cherokee County. We have a few of our partners from City of Woodstock as well, Tracy Albers, Community Development Director, and Jamie Palmer, Assistant to the City Manager. So and the logos on here give you a sense of kind of the wide range of partners that we have on this project. This is really a joint effort between Cherokee County, Ball Ground, Canton, Holly Springs, and Woodstock. I see Chris Lilly just joined us as well from City of Ball Ground. So we have several of our partners here. This is really a county-wide effort with all of the different county and municipalities. So it's everyone really coming together to look at the county and the cities, and not just the unincorporated part of the county. Next slide. So we've gone through welcome and intros, and we're going to give you a brief overview of the Safe Streets and Roads for All program. That's SS4A that you see on the screen. Then Ansley will give kind of an overview of what we've heard so far in our community engagement efforts to date. Then we'll jump into our safety analysis, and finally, hopefully reserve most of the time for hearing from you. So discussion and some activities. Next slide. And we can jump ahead to the SS4A overviews. So Ansley's gonna walk you through a polling activity we have for you today.
Thanks, Kat. So we're going to be using this Mentimeter tool to hear from you all. So if you can go to a browser on your phone, or if you're on a laptop on another window, and go to menti.com and enter the code 15809877. That will bring you here to our first poll. So please let us know if you want to come off mute or put into the chat if you're having any issues getting into the polling.
Can you repeat the code, please?
Sure. It's 15809877. We'll put that in the chat as well. Folks, another minute or so. There we go. We're seeing some more responses come in. Right. And if it's not working for you for some reason, also feel free to put in the chat your affiliation. We'll move to the next poll. We want to hear from you all. It looks like some people may have started on this. We want to hear from you all which jurisdiction best describes where you live. Okay, wonderful. Looks like we've got a great mix from different areas. We'll be using this tool a little bit later on in the meeting, but thank you all for sharing so we can learn a little bit about who's here. Pass it back to Kat.
Yeah. Thanks, Ansley. So just to kind of give you an overview of this program, this is a relatively new program from the Federal Highway Administration, the Safe Streets and Roads for All program. And it really aims to look at transportation safety from a holistic point of view. So, it's not just about infrastructure or enforcement, but it's really about looking at, safe road users. Are people using the roads properly? Do people have the proper information that they need to be using the roads effectively? Post-crash care, so when crashes do occur, what is the emergency response program? Safe vehicles, so looking at if vehicles have a broken taillight or, if seatbelts are operational, really making sure that vehicles themselves are designed and operating in a way that supports safe travel. Safe speeds, this is a really big one. Speeds has risen to the forefront in terms of looking at contributing factors to severe crashes. And so safe speeding is really one of the things that is important in trying to create a whole safe system. And then of course, safe roads, which is sort of the traditional approach that we've taken with safety planning, and in terms of looking at the roadway design itself and how is the road design serving safety today. Next slide. Our process includes a variety of inputs. So community inputs, part of what we're doing today. We have a series of tools that Ansley will walk through in the next part of the presentation that we've been using to try to get feedback from the community as well as stakeholders. We've had a really large and diverse stakeholder committee that's come together to give input so far. Data analysis, there's a robust safety analysis behind all of this from a variety of different data sources. All of that is kind of put together to try to identify the highest injury network. And then best practices, looking at what are the safety countermeasures available. A Federal Highway Administration has put a lot of research into specific safety countermeasures, and so looking at those. And then, of course, the next piece is context sensitivity, so figuring out which of those are appropriate for Cherokee County. And that kind of gives us ultimately the countermeasures. All of that will go into our analysis and framework development to come out with the overall Vision Zero initiative, which will include both projects, policies, and programs. Next slide. A little bit about Vision Zero. So if anyone is not familiar with Vision Zero, has not heard this term before, this is a new term relatively new term, I should say, that is being used to describe a commitment to zero traffic deaths. And this project is really the county and its partners coming together to make that commitment and establish that all traffic deaths are unacceptable, and a commitment to reducing that number to zero by some date in the future. So just to kind of give you a sense of how Vision Zero differs from the traditional safety planning approach, A traditional approach might focus on just preventing crashes overall, whereas the safe system approach is more keyed into how we reduce injuries and traffic fatalities. Whereas the traditional approach might focus on improving human behavior, the safe system approach is more focused on understanding human behavior and designing for it in such a way where we understand humans are going to make mistakes, and how do we build a system that is resilient to those mistakes. A traditional approach might control speeding overall, so an individual vehicle moving, whereas the safe system approach reduces the overall system kinetic energy. So really taking into account all of the cars on the roadway rather than just the worst speeding offenders. A traditional approach might blame individuals for a crash. So, writing off this crash happened because this person did X, Y, or Z, whereas the safe system approach is really all decision makers are accountable and looking at a holistic view of what went into making that crash happen. A traditional approach is really reactive based on the crash history, whereas the safe system approach more proactively looks at risk factors so that we can assess where crashes might be happening in the future. This is especially important for types of crashes like pedestrian and bicyclist crashes, where there just aren't as many people on the road. So there might be a lot of close calls that we're missing if we only look at the crash history. Next slide. As I mentioned previously, high vehicle speeds are really a key factor when you're looking at those severe outcomes of crashes. At 40 miles per hour, 46% of crashes with a pedestrian will result in a fatality. At 30%, at 30 miles per hour, that percentage goes down to 20%, and at 20 miles per hour, that percentage goes down to 8%. So really, a big part of the national movement for Vision Zero has been about slowing down streets wherever possible. This is one of the potential strategies that we'll be looking at for this plan. Next slide. And just to give you kind of an overview of our schedule for this project, we are kind of in the process of wrapping up our data collection and existing conditions analysis. A lot of that is going into our baseline conditions reports. That really says, from a transportation and land use and safety perspective, what's on the ground today and how does that impact safety. And we're kind of in the process of pivoting to how do we translate that into a plan for Cherokee County. So we're really at this turning point in the process where we've looked at everything, all of the data. We've heard from community members at a lot of our pop-ups and stakeholder events about what the goals and priorities should be. We're here today to really share some of that information with you and get any other input that y'all have, and then turning that into the plan moving forward. The draft Safe Streets for All action plan will be delivered to the Federal Highway Administration in January of next year, 2025, with a final submittal date to FHWA in March of next year. Next slide.
All right, I'll be taking a few minutes to share what we've been hearing so far through our community engagement process. As Kat spoke to, we've been working with a stakeholder committee that represents several different organizations throughout the county, all of the local jurisdictions, the school district, members of your police and fire, emergency personnel, and some other organizations like Reinhardt University. So we have had our first meeting back in June. We'll be sharing some key takeaways from that in a moment. And then this month, we've also done 2 community pop-ups. We were at the Canton First Friday, as well as the Woodstock Farmers Market last weekend, where it was a great opportunity to get out and meet people where they were at, hear about their experiences on the roads in Cherokee, and get some input. So we'll be sharing what we've been hearing. And then, as you know, you're here today at our first round of public meetings. We'll be having another round in November as we get farther along in the process to share recommendations. So at that first stakeholder committee, we used various tools to hear from folks. We did some polls, we had discussion groups, and some of the key themes that rose to the top were the need for some safe streets principles as we're planning in Cherokee County. Development and growth were really emphasized as things that we need to get ahead of so that as new developments come in, streets are designed appropriately to handle the traffic and make sure that they're safe. Many people also brought up that bike and pedestrian infrastructure is really inadequate in a lot of parts of the county. When we asked about what people thought were the contributors to traffic danger, distracted driving and aggressive driving and speeding really were what most people honed in on. We also asked about what people would prioritize for what types of solutions, and we heard a good balance of both education and infrastructure improvements, but we did hear overwhelmingly that improved infrastructure is the top need. We've also had a community survey out for the last couple months, and it's still available. If you haven't taken that, we encourage you to go to our website and take the survey. It's a real quick, probably 5 to 10 minute survey. It'll really help us as we're determining priorities for this initiative. But we wanted to share kind of what we've been hearing so far. We've asked folks about what are their typical travel patterns, what modes do they like to use, and overwhelmingly you hear most folks are driving their vehicle. But we did ask about if safety were not a barrier, would folks take more trips if it was possible via walking and biking, and that was shown in the results that a lot of people did say yes to that. So there is a desire for more walking and biking for sure. Again, speeding is something we're hearing a lot about. Many people think that's the top concern throughout the county. And in terms of different types of solutions or strategies we can take, policy and enforcement were considered the most important or top rated solution in terms of what we can do with limited funding from taxpayers. We also have an online map tool, which is a great opportunity for you to go look throughout the county, zoom in on specific spots where you know you've observed different issues, and you can drop a pin on the map and then write a comment to tell us what kinds of concerns you're seeing. We've had almost 300 comments so far. We're getting a lot of good feedback on, there's various pages that you can click through so you can get feedback about intersections and roadway design, bike and pedestrian needs, weather and lighting. For instance, are there areas that feel more dangerous when it's raining? And then rail and freight. So we're trying to get a lot of good input, and this will really help us shape the recommendations of the plan. So far, we're seeing the most activity on this map in the Riverstone area of Canton, as well as along Cumming Highway. Highway 92 throughout the whole corridor is very popular. Downtown Woodstock, you're also seeing a lot of comments, particularly about bike and pedestrian infrastructure. Roadway design and intersection configurations, we're hearing a lot about places where there's confusion on the road, or places where intersections are where people are seeing conflicts. And then speeding is definitely being referenced quite frequently. we did just want to share a couple of photos from our outreach events we've been doing over the last month. These were great opportunities to learn specifically what people have observed. We had a map present so people could add dots on corridors where they would prioritize improvements. We also, did some polling with community members, and we heard about sidewalks and crosswalks are really desirable in downtown areas. We also heard that speeding needs to be addressed, particularly in the downtown areas. Those were some of the major themes we've heard so far. And with that, I will pass it back to Kat.
Thanks, Ansley. So we're going to give just kind of a brief overview of our high injury network analysis. The high injury network is a really key part of the SS4A action plan analysis. This allows us to identify the roadways that are the highest priority for safety improvements. These represent the roadways where the majority of crashes have occurred, places where they represent more than their fair share of crashes based on, the volumes along that roadway today, as well as the places where there's high risk today. So even if it doesn't pop up in the crash history or the crash rates, are there risk factors that make this road potentially something that will have more crashes in the future? So these are 5, calling them our primary selection criteria or safety factors. We're looking at crash history, and the data we looked at for the crash history was 2018 to 2022. So it's 5 years of crash data. We also looked at crash rate. So oftentimes the crash history, you can see even from the small image, the roadways that are popping up really bright are State Route 92 and I-575. These are the places where you have the highest traffic volumes as well. So there's more opportunities for crashes to happen. The crash rate, conversely, really gives us an opportunity to say, well, how many crashes are happening here today weighted by the traffic volumes? So this helps us look at particularly some of those roadways in the northern part of the county or some of the local roads where there's lower traffic volumes, but relatively high crashes. Similarly, KSI crash rate, so KSI stands for killed or severely injured. These are the most severe crashes where there was a fatality or a severe injury as a result. This is a really important factor as well, going back to the idea of Vision Zero and reducing the killed and severely injured people from traffic crashes. So crash rate allows us to look at, per whatever number of trips on that road, how many KSI crashes occurred. These last two on the right, pedestrian risk factors and bicyclist risk factors, this is a new data set that was developed by the Atlanta Regional Commission relatively recently. And they look at a series of factors. There's about 14 of them total. These are factors that make roads systematically more dangerous for people walking and biking, respectively. So these are things like number of lanes, speed limit, presence of a walkway or a bikeway. And there's about 14 of them total. So, we looked at relative in Cherokee County, the most risky roads for people walking and biking. Next slide. So this map shows us, based on those 5 factors or 5 safety factors, these are the roads that qualified for at least one of them. So you see the roads ranging from yellow to red. Yellow represents the roads that met one of those criteria. Moving up, the darkest red roads are the ones that met all 5 of those criteria. And so this is really our starting point. I will say, generally from a best practices perspective, we want to target about 10% of Cherokee County's road network for the high injury network. This really gives us a small enough list of roadways that the county and the municipal partners are able to properly prioritize where those improvements occur over the implementation time span. Next slide. So in order to get closer to that 10% target, we also wanted to do sort of a secondary filter, and that's looking at equity factors. Equity is also a really important consideration as part of the SS4A program. The federal guidelines for the program emphasize that improvements should be prioritized for the most vulnerable populations, for people who have been historically disadvantaged. So we put that outcome of sort of this primary safety analysis filter for the high injury network, and we put it through a secondary filter looking at these equity factors. So the 5 factors here are Justice 40 communities, and Justice 40 is a federal program that identifies the census tracts with highest quantity of disadvantaged communities. Low vehicle ownership. So this one is really, pretty clear connection. Low vehicle ownership communities, a lot of people who don't have access to a vehicle, these people have no choice but to walk, bike, or rely on a transit ride or some other ride to get to their daily activities. So these people, we particularly want to make sure that they have safe options in their community. The lowest vehicle ownership, I think, is there's some census tracts with almost 20% of people who do not, or 20% of households, who do not have access to a vehicle, particularly around the Canton area, around Bells Ferry. So similar to Justice 40 community, the Canton area is popping up. Low income is the next criteria we looked at. So identifying places where there is lower income. Again, these people often are relying on walking and biking for their daily needs. Just want to make sure that those options are safe. Race and ethnicity. So we looked at, where are the proportions of places that have the non-white residents. And then for age as well. So looking for populations of over 65 years old throughout the county. Where do they live? Next slide. So that was our secondary criteria, and that resulted in this version of the map you're looking at here. These roads highlighted qualify for at least 3 of those 5 equity criteria. So this is getting us a little bit closer to that 10% target, meaning 10% of the overall roadway network that's identified today. We're really trying to drill down into the highest need area in terms of where's there a safety need, and also where is there a need in terms of the people who rely on these roads every day. So we'll have a question a little later in the discussion that gets into your particular thoughts on this network, but this is really one where we're looking to get your thoughts on, are your priorities represented here? What have we missed? And the next step for us will really be to add on sort of a third filter on top of this, which is the community input layer. So based on the community input we've gotten at the meetings and at the pop-up events, are there other roads missing or other roads that need to be given a higher priority level here? Next slide.